So for you who are just coming in, we're just landing here, taking some breaths together, getting ready for this gathering. We are gathering from all over the world, from all corners, to dive a bit deeper into the IDGs.
Okay. So this about taking a deep breath and connecting to yourself, that's a bit what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah.
But
good start.
But on another level also.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're very happy to see you all here. And this is, as you know, an IDG gathering. And we've had several of them during the last year. And this one actually builds a bit upon the last one that we had, which was with Peter Stenge and Michael Bakker and René Lertzman, who talked about IDGs on a systemic or organizational level. We tend to think of them maybe on an individual level, but the Inner Development Goals are also about systemic qualities. And so this time we'll build on that going forward.
Yes. And your name is Johan Holm.
That's right.
Yes.
Yes, and you're Fatima Bukhari.
Yes. And we have some exciting guests here today. And yeah, what's interesting about today is this tapping into the awareness of being in connection with myself, and thereby also being a better connection with others, and how to use this and build connections to tap into collective intelligence and collective action. And to our help, I will start with introducing you, Laurel Patterson from UNDP.
So, are you with us, Laurel? Will your beautiful blue background? So, if you want to turn on your microphone.
Yes, calling you from New York.
Yeah. Welcome,
Good
Laurel.
to see you both, and greetings. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today. We are waiting to be joined both by Otto Scharmer, one of our partners in the work that we're doing in the UN system.
Hi, Laurel. I'm actually here.
Ooh, hello, Otto. Okay, 2 out of 3, you guys. So let's see if Sara, our other colleague and co-conspirator, Sara Ferrer Olivella, is joining us from Colombia. And she's going to be telling us a little bit both about her experience in the work that we're collectively doing at UNDP, but some specific work that's happening in her context. But I would suggest perhaps Johan and Fatima, if you agree, Otto and I could get started, and then as Sara.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please start. We're really looking forward to this. So let's get going. Welcome,
Okay.
Otto. Welcome, Laurel.
Welcome, Otto. Okay, we're here again. Otto and I were just on screens like this together in a wonderful session, which was the opening of the U School last week. So it was really a fantastic co-initiation to be a part of last week, and it's lovely to be here with all of you today. So what Otto and myself and Sara wanted to do in the next maybe 85 minutes that we have together now is we wanted to focus on the way that we've been working together to build infrastructures of connection. We think it relates specifically to the IDGs. It certainly relates to the SDGs. And we have found in the work that we've been doing together, this is a couple of things. Certainly it's resonating with people. There really seems to be a need in the UN system, right? But also we realize that we're trying to shift the focus a little bit away from a focus on, which has been the past, on doing, on acceleration. We also do work on SDG acceleration, but how do we shift gears a little bit less on outcomes, a little bit less on getting there as fast as we can, and a little bit more on the social field, a little bit more on the ways that we connect together, with the hypothesis being, if we put our focus on the ways in which we connect and holding space for transformation to emerge, we have a better opportunity, a better possibility to tackle the challenges that we're seeing today. So this is sort of a counter movement that many of us are supporting and nurturing at the moment. This is what we wanted to tell you a little bit about our experiences on this journey, and really have an opportunity to interact and hear from all of you. So what I wanted to do was just tee up the current moment, which I don't think is a shock to anyone, but all the same, we have just put out as UNDP our Human Development Report for 2022, very much focused on uncertainty, unsettled lives, unsettled times, unsettled minds. We'll come to that as well too. I'm going to hand over to Otto to share his reflections, and then together with Sara, we're going to tell you a little bit about the experience that we've been working on together. So if I just share my screen, I'd say it's the scariest part, but not anymore, because we're getting better. I'm getting better at these things. So what I wanted to do is just move you through as the way that we're seeing the current moment, and why this is so important for the SDGs, and why the IDGs are also so important in this context. So the first, we've seen this unprecedented drop in human development over the past 2 years. 90% of countries have seen a drop in their HDI, their Human Development Index, either in 2020 or in 2021. The unprecedented drop in HDI for the first time since the HDI was calculated was 2020. That was a shock. And then 2021, we did it again. So we're in an unprecedented space of reversals that are threatening or have already wiped out a tremendous amount of SDG progress. This is the reality that we're working and living in today. At the same time, we're seeing an incredible rise in stress. This rise in stress predates COVID. It's not only because of the pandemic itself. Even before COVID, 6 out of 7 people felt that their lives were insecure. They would have rated themselves as having high levels, feelings of insecurity in their lives. And this is directly related to inequality, which we have seen rise since the SDGs themselves were established. One of these areas has been tremendously difficult to make progress, and we often see backsliding. This is directly related to this acute sense of stress and linked, therefore, to inequality. So what I wanted to leave you with as we're opening up is just a sense of what this uncertainty complex looks like. And you can find all of the details in the 2022 HDR, because colleagues may have, or people may have said in past, well, the world has always been uncertain. And that's true, right? We have faced conflicts and crises and disease in the past. So what's new about this current moment? Why do we need especially to pay attention today? And the first is that we're seeing a collision and a compounding of different forms and types of uncertainty that are impacting the world, that are impacting us individually in our lives. And the first is, of course, this destabilizing pressure on our climate, on our natural systems, on our planetary systems, which is happening right now. It is being counterbalanced. We're seeing sweeping societal transformations, some for the better, some not, to try to get a handle on this tremendous damage that we are seeing in planetary systems. Then combined with that, the third layer, which we would add, is this intensifying polarization. And Otto, I know this is something that you're going to speak to a little bit as well too. And when you combine these together, these are new forces that are combining with the sorts of uncertainties that people will have always faced. And it's making this particular moment incredibly challenging for all of us, incredibly difficult to navigate, and incredibly difficult to predict the future. This is the world as we're seeing it today. So from our side, in our collaboration with a number of different partners within the UN system, outside of the UN system, together with Presencing Institute, but many other leaders in this space of transformation, we really put 3 big questions to ourselves. And I'm not going to answer them, but I am going to pose them, and we're going to explore it over the course of this call. And the first is really, how can we use awareness-based methods and systems to move beyond responding to crisis, so that we're not in a responsive mode, but we're sensing and we're actualizing those just and equitable futures that we write about and we talk about in a lot of our documents and a lot of meetings and spaces like this. But how do we do it? Not talk about it, do it. How do we bridge this gap from an awareness that we might have to the actions that would shift systems towards the better? Question number 1. The second one is really about how we move. I take the screen sharing off for now. How we move from to a deeper level of commitment to leaving no one behind. And what I mean by that, what we found particularly important in the work that we've done together is not only committing to leaving no one behind as a principle, but a commitment to challenging and exploring our own blind spots. What does this tell us about ourselves, and understanding the systems that we are all part of? And in many cases, those systems are designed to leave people behind. These are difficult things for us to confront, but if we don't, We can't make progress against this uncertainty complex. And the third, really the big driving question for us is, how do we lead an approach to transformation that is fully accessible to all? How do we democratize transformation literacy in the organization? And how do we move awareness-based approaches to collective action from the periphery to the core of how we work? It's not an other thing, it's not an add-on. It becomes part of the way that we do business, the way that we interact with each other, the way that we show up for our colleagues and our communities and so on. How do we start to intentionally build that? And that's really for us where we're seeing this emphasis on infrastructures of connection, on spaces where people can come together, a little bit like we are here, but with quite a different tone and context, with tools and methods. It's not out of our hands to create these spaces and lead them, right? As a very new form of leadership, which we want to support, not only in the UN system, but of course, with our partners in developing contexts that are directly navigating many of these challenges. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. That's sort of both this moment and captured in the RHDR, Human Development Report 2022. Some of these big questions that I want to put on the table, and we'll explore them here. I'm going to hand over to Otto for his reflections. And Sara, I saw that you also joined us, so welcome. I'm glad that you can be here. We will bring you in just following Otto. Otto.
Thank you, Laurel, and hi everyone, and hi Sara. Building on what you just laid out, Laurel, we all are just coming out of the UN General Assembly week, and I think the sense that I got can be summarized with 2 or 3 lines. We all know what the problems are. We all know a lot about what the solutions are. But somehow, on the level of the collective, we are unable to put them into practice. So there is an enormous knowing-doing gap. And I think where our inquiry starts is why that actually is the case and how we can address it, as Laurel said. And our basic intuition is that what's missing is not more of the abstract knowledge that we already have, but what's missing is a different kind of knowledge or knowing that would help us to activate agency on the level of the collective. So from a systems view, I would say, whenever you have a system where you have a decoupling between the head, what we think and say, and the hand, what we do on the level of the collective, the leverage point is to access the knowing of the heart, to access our deeper sources of knowing. And that's essentially, I believe, where the IDGs come in. And the shorthand, so if I would so let's just forget about all the distinctions and let's say, what is really the essence of the IDG in the context that Laurel was talking about? And I would say that given the first 2 things, what I said, we know what the problems are, we know what the solutions are, but somehow we are not able to activate them on the level of the collective. I would say what's needed today is a shift in the level of relationships, because that's true for almost all leadership challenges that we face, or any of you is facing in your organizations, right? To address these challenges, you need to change the behavior of other stakeholders outside of your own organization. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, by shifting the quality of relationship. How are you going to do that? What's the only leverage point you have? It's shifting the inner place from that you operate, deepening your level of listening, developing an access point that allows you to deepen and thereby shift the quality of relationships you have to others. So I think that's almost a logical direction how the current challenge that we face collectively is really translating into a call for a shift of relationship, which in essence requires us to broaden and deepen our awareness that we operate from, not only as individuals, but also collectively. So I want to just take, before we move into a more specific case, I want to just share a few distinctions with you from the viewpoint of systems thinking and systems leadership. And let me just share 2 or 3 pictures real quick. So the what you see here is something you have seen many times, which is kind of a systems thinking depicted with an iceberg model, right? So symptoms, visible to the eye at the top, and then systems thinking really means, or leadership from a systems view really means to not just react against the symptoms, but to understand and address the deeper root issues. And as you can see here, structures, paradigms of thought, and then source of our awareness, kind of source of our consciousness, source of our own actions. That's a deeper level of systems thinking that we believe is really critical for today to address these leadership issues alluded to before. So what we call awareness-based systems change is based on the following 3 principles. You cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness. That's what I really learned in more than 20 years of working as an action researcher in a whole variety of change and systems change initiatives. So to put that differently, you cannot change a system unless you transform the mindsets of the people who are enacting this system. Now, the real question, of course, is how. You can't transform consciousness unless you make a system see, sense, and invert itself. So make a system see itself is really holding up the mirror, right? Sense itself is really activating all our senses, and also kind of activating our feelings, our heart as an organ of perception. And inversion really means to realize that the issues outside are a mirror of our issues inside, so that the leverage point of shifting the relationships around me has to do with a shift in my own awareness and in my own attention and intention in the first place. You can't lead systems transformation unless you sense and actualize the future as it emerges. So let me rephrase that. You can't lead systems transformation unless you access your deeper sources of knowing, right? Which is kind of the knowing of the heart, but also the knowing of the hand that emerges from us being in the front line of facing challenges that require us to show up in a different way. And that's essentially kind of what the U process is, a language for how to do that on the level of the collective. And it's essentially moving into what you can see here, a cultivation of these 3 inner capacities: opening the mind, opening the heart, opening the will, aka accessing our curiosity, compassion, and courage. And open mind really means seeing with fresh eyes. Open heart really means seeing a situation, a leadership situation you face through the eyes of your stakeholders, through the eyes of the others. And open will really means letting go and letting come. It's the capacity of letting go of the old and letting come of the new. Now, what do we what do we learn from working with great leaders like the late CEO of Hanover Insurance, Bill O'Brien, who claimed that the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. So the success of what I do as a change leader depends on the inner place from that I operate. Or Christiana Figueres, who arguably is one of the most inspiring leaders on our planet right now, and the architect of the and driving force of the Paris Agreement, who in a recent discussion said, so really to shift the level of relationships that you need in order to deal with these massive network leadership challenges that we face, working on yourself, working on your way, how you show up, and working on your own listening is really the only thing you can control. It's not, of course, not the only thing you do, but it's the only thing you can control and therefore have a huge leverage on. So when we now look into reality and say, okay, so if that's kind of, if this is the deeper territory of leadership, kind of cultivating these deeper conditions, what is it that we see going on, particularly over the past years in most of our systems? And the answer is pretty much the exact opposite. It's not an opening of mind, heart, and will, but a massive freezing of the mind, heart, will, aka amplification of ignorance, hate, and fear. I don't need to go into all the details here because kind of they have been playing out for enough years now in front of all of us. So what I'm basically saying is that leadership today is really a journey that is a process of navigating these two deeper dynamics in their intertwined connection with each other. So what I'm basically saying is, when we face a challenge of disruption, and that's pretty much the only thing we know about the future, disruption is not only going to stay, but it's going to go up. So when we face a challenge of disruption, we have a choice. We can respond to that by an inner gesture that's about turning away and closing down, or an inner gesture that's about turning toward and opening up. If I respond the first way, I activate one kind of process that by now we all know very well. If I respond the other way, we activate a different kind of process and a different kind of social field that, from our own experience, we also know, all of us know very well. And when you now step back and say, wait a minute, so what really is the difference between these two very different social fields? So the first one is really, when you look at the deeper architecture here and ways the mechanisms, is really based on an architecture of disconnect, of separation from each other, of othering, if you want. And it gives rise to a social grammar of destruction that you see kind of spelled out here on the right-hand side, and is fueled by, essentially, by something I call ecosystem awareness. And when I say ecosystem awareness, I don't mean it in a moral sense, but in a technical sense. It's an awareness that is originating from inside your own boundaries. It's unable to operate from outside your own boundaries. And if you look at this other kind of this generative, so that's kind of the toxic social field of absencing. And if you look at the generative social field down here, it's based on an architecture of connection, kind of deepening our connections. It gives rise to a social grammar of co-creation, as we see spelled out on the right-hand side. And it is fueled by something that I call ecosystem awareness, by which I mean an awareness that originates or can originate from outside our own skin, outside our own boundaries, through opening the mind, opening the heart, opening the will. That's what it does, right? To the degree that we open these capacities of knowing, our awareness begins to extend to the ecosystem surrounding us. So essentially, what I'm saying is something very simple. We face unprecedented challenges of disruption. And disruption means that the future is going to be different from the present. And the journey from here to there, from the current moment to the emerging future, is a journey that's not only an outer journey, but an inner journey. An inner journey that is going through these thresholds, opening the mind, opening the heart, opening the will, and that needs a new type of cultivation work, support structure, you could say, not only individually, but also on a collective level. And so I want to end with a really simple distinction, kind of how really the call for new awareness is showing up on the levels of macro systems transformation today in just about every field. And this distinction you see here is a distinction between 4 different operating systems, you could say, right? Kind of how we input in authority-centric, output in efficiency-centric, outcome and user-centric, and then 4.0. Now, in learning, but of course, real learning and real healthcare, right, is
It seems
moving
like your
us.
connection is unstable.
Okay, so you cannot hear me or see me?
Now we can hear you.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
In fact.
So what I was just saying is when you apply these distinctions here of 4 stages, how systems can evolve, operating system based on input authority-centric, output and efficiency-centric, outcome and user-centric, and regenerative and ecosystem-centric, that today in most systems we are here, 2.0, and moving towards 3.0, right? That's kind of the student-centric school or learning system. That's the patient-centric medical system. But in order to realize the SDGs, all of them, and in order to really respond to the challenges that we face, we need to, I believe, move to something that I call here 4.0 or regenerative and ecosystem-centric, which means learning towards not only transmitting the old curriculum, but learning more on a whole person, whole systems level, helping learners to shape it, because that's what we need this century. And in health, kind of moving away from just patient-centric into attending that through strengthening as pretty much the mother of problems. Organic agriculture or sustainable agriculture might often missing that transformative dimension, kind of really transforming the deeper root issues, which is something that yet is something to be developed and to develop mechanisms for. In development, GDP, right? Today, the way we measure, in 1990, UNDP with the first Human Development Report put out this kind of metrics here, the HDI, that also is a major reference point. And with the 2020 Human Development Report, we have a shift from just human well-being to human and planetary well-being. And that's, of course, an aspiration today, but something we still need to realize. And lastly, everything what I said so far, so we have 2 powerful mechanisms: the visible hand of the state and the invisible hand of the market, right? And then the third one here is organized interest groups, kind of coalition building to shift the regulatory framework. That's pretty much what we have today. But what we know is this is not the challenges we face. And what we really need is a shift towards a fourth complementing coordination action from shared awareness, and which really has to do with making awareness-based collective action more relevant to the navigation of larger systems. We see it already spontaneously happening on the local level, on many cities, kind of where stakeholders organize around the commons, right? The regeneration of our commons. We see that even on a global scale in part, and I think the Paris Agreement is a great example for that. The SDGs in 2015 also, but now we have the next challenge to put them into practice. And that cannot be done just with the old operating system, but it requires us to shift the operating system into this direction. And that's where the UN system is a great example kind of for new capacities that are necessary. And, summarizing what I said here is something very simple. We know we cannot fix the problems in our world with the same thinking that created them. And the same way we can say we cannot fix the challenges that we face today with the same economic paradigm that created them in the first place. And that's where these deeper leadership and collaboration capacities that are based on creating a shared awareness and then kind of operating together in a new way are really at the front line of the innovation that's necessary today. And with that, back to you, Laurel, to set up the case story we hear.
Otto, thank you so much. Colleagues, I know it's always extremely powerful and a lot to take in when we've heard this from Otto. So Otto, thank you. Some have asked in the chat if there will be an opportunity to share slides and other resource materials. We'll be sure that comes back to you and you have an opportunity to reflect on some of this. We will move into smaller groups as well too, an opportunity for us to talk about some of these in smaller groups together, just to also share that's coming up next. But Otto, really thank you. Thank you for that. So I want to pick up where Otto left off and then introduce Sara. So Otto spoke at the end about awareness-based collective action. And this was something that we picked up, this particular notion, awareness-based collective action, as something so critical at the start of COVID. We were asking ourselves how we move forward in a world that was changing so quickly around us. For an organization of our size and everyone at home and shifting to a digital interface, whereas for many of us, the face-to-face, and for many of you, of course, which is extremely important. And in that space of really recognizing and seeing where we were as a planet and the challenges we were facing, we partnered up with Otto and with the Presencing Institute, learning from the work that they had done on the Gaia journey, right, which was a global, fairly impromptu sense-making architecture into COVID. And we created spaces within the UN system for a similar inquiry. This started over the course of 2020. And what was important to us in setting that up is that these were spaces that were open to anyone in the UN system. Some of you have commented in the chat, I've seen a little bit on leaders or leadership. It's extremely important for us in our story, but we are all leaders. We are looking to support agency in others. We're not teaching anybody anything. This is a mistake. So for us, it was really important that these spaces were open. These are capabilities that people are able to interact with in their lives and in the context in which they're operating. That is never the same for any of us. So with that journey, we had tremendous resonance also from other agencies. And I should say several of you are on the call who've been part of this work well before COVID, right, in the UN system. So we were also building from those foundations. We created with the Presencing Institute a 4-month action learning lab on awareness-based systems transformation, with 7 different parts of the UN system comprising our humanitarian, development, and peace pillars. And this was really an opportunity for colleagues to take these practices also into their own context more deeply, from prototyping and coming in with various teams working on the blue economy, to the informal economy, to disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration in the Congo, we had this groundswell of colleagues that were experimenting, taking this forward in different ways. For us as UNDP, we built this directly as a foundational pillar of our leadership, for our leadership in UNDP. And with Otto and a number of leaders, including Cristiana Figueres, who we invited in, we've worked through a journey with our first cohort of 40 of our resident representatives in awareness-based systems transformation. And so Sara, who I'm going to introduce next, is part of that journey with us. And I think what's really important, Sara, is that there's a lot of work that's taking place in Colombia. There's a lot of extremely relevant efforts which have been underway far before we started this conversation with you. But I think what's quite interesting for people to have a sense of, Sara, is both your leadership, you were part of this first cohort, but also the way that that's connected to the work that you're doing in Colombia, what's changed for you, what you've been able to amplify and connect with differently, perhaps through the work that we've been doing together and that you've been doing in country. So Sara is our resident representative, if you've just joined, in Colombia, and I hand over to you. Welcome, Sara, and thanks.
Thanks very much, Laurel. Great to see you, Otto, and great to meet you all. Just thanks for the opportunity also to share. This is, as you know, it's a journey. And for us here in Colombia, Colombia, for many of you who you don't know, there is much more to the drugs and the narco traffic. It's a country with just so much diversity and potential to contribute to the world. In truth, it has over 115 indigenous peoples, Afros, and different kind of ethnographic groups that could contribute so much to the development of the country. And yet, what we see, there has been a pattern of exclusion for so many years. And so what I wanted to bring to this conversation is a few reflections on the whys and what is behind, in perhaps a concrete example on a particular part of the country, and what does it mean transitioning to green energy, and the reality check in this transformation, what it means, who are the winners and losers in that green energy. And so perhaps the first thing I'm connecting a little bit to what Otto was saying is about reflecting about the governance structures of the country. You know, the governance structures are dictated by laws and public policies and institutions. And yet these spaces only reflect one vision of understanding the world. And so this ethnic vision, although they are recognized in principle in the Constitution and in the laws, in practice, the rights of the indigenous peoples and Afros and farmers have not been fully realized. And why I'm putting this up front is because the political participation to this space of excluded groups is unequal. And therefore, we are not in the same space to actually connect and listen to each other. Also, the capacities to operate in these spaces are unequal, to actually have an equal discussion and actually listen to each other and come out with a greater bargain for all. And the dialogue is biased to one group that holds the power and goes top down. And perhaps I wanted to bring this to the occasion because Otto was bringing very specific, and you can see it so clearly in Colombia, because after 200 years of their own history, I mean, if you think Western history, because this country had indigenous populations for many thousand years, but before it was colonized, let's say, this is the first time you have a left government coming into power and saying, hey, we can actually bring the voice to those who have been excluded for such a long time. Hey, is there a different development model that could be pursued in the country where it could actually give greatest equality and access to rights and justice to those most excluded? And here I want to connect to the issue of what is the development model that we are pursuing here in Colombia. And the reason why I want to put it, because the president of Colombia was just last week in the General Assembly, in the UN General Assembly, and provoked a lot of rising eyebrows in terms of some of the questions he was putting on the table, saying, can we consider a world that invests of economically growing actually decrease the growing? And in his view was not actually decreasing the well-being, but what was decreasing is the reckless growing at the expense of the natural resources base of the country. And the reason why I put it here is because the growing of this country and has been at the expense of lots of knowledge, traditional ancestral knowledge on how to take care of that relation between the man and the land, the relations of humans and the earth. And that connection and that harmony has been lost. And so, the knowledge beyond science, and I think Otto was alluding this, can we bring other types of knowledge to the table into that conversation to change progressively the economic and social systems? And here is where I want to bring the example of La Guajira. And La Guajira is this amazing desert in the tip of the Colombian, surrounded by sea, bordering Venezuela. And why I want to bring La Guajira? Because La Guajira it's known now as the engine for green energy of Colombia. And for years, for decades, La Guajira, where it hosts, the community of Wayuu, also was the center of the fossil fuel development with carbon mining companies. And what has happened there is that although had all this knowledge and tradition, it has been, everything was in fossil fuels produced was extracted and left the region. And what has happened is that we have, in a country like Colombia with unbelievable wealth, we have children dying of malnutrition and preventable diseases. And why? How is it possible that the generative wealth of this part of Colombia, nothing is left in the territory? And here is where I want to put it to the table, because then we are in the middle of this transition to aeolic energy. And so in principle to the world, this is a good bargain. We are going from energy which was polluting, emitting green gas emissions, to a clean energy. And yet what we have seen in this transition to green energy in this part of the country, with 50 aeolic parks, which actually could power the whole of Colombia in terms of energy, what we see is that the people living there, the indigenous people living, the Wayuu people, they have not gotten any benefits of this transition. And why is that? Why the territory has only been thought about a logic of taking out resources and not actually planning those resources with the communities that live in the territory, and they have a special connection. And I want to say that because Colombia is seen and presented to the world as one of the countries with the cleanest energy matrix in the world. And so that's welcome, and that's to be welcome, and also with the cleanest, potential contributors if we can stop the deforestation in the Amazons. And yet you have people in the country which actually are dying of preventable diseases and hunger. And so what we have done as the United Nations, as the United Nations Development Program, what we have actually been doing is actually ensuring that we strengthen the capacity of these communities, indigenous, which have a very particular, the Wayús community. They don't have a vertical leadership, but horizontal, which it makes it much harder to engage to one another. We have built what we call the intercultural Yanama for sustainable human development and the well-being, Buen Vivir. And what it is a platform where these indigenous communities can have a dialogue with other actors in the territory and convey this actually why things are not going in the way they should be going. And why I'm saying this conversation is not an equal conversation. That has been a lot of work in working with these communities to strengthening their way of engaging with others, because it's very difficult for us, I would say, Western educated in terms of looking at the world, to understand that there are other things that are intangible to us that matter. For instance, that eolic parks have, that they actually interfere with the dreams of the indigenous people and their cosmos. And these are different layers of understanding on how this world is connected to spirituality that we don't fully grasp. And yet there is a harmony there. And I don't want to sound, something that is not, untouchable, but I've been interacting with these indigenous people. What I can say is I've done my utmost to listen with active listening, to try to understand what they are trying to tell us. And when they say they have their own system of governance, it doesn't mean it's about putting multi-ethnic in laws and public policies, but it means finding a way that they can interact with the, let's say, legal governance systems that exist in the country. So I wanted to put it out there because for me, it has been a journey of understanding that the well-being they are seeking is different from the well-being that the broader society in Colombia is looking at. So for an entity like the United Nations Development Program, our role is actually facilitate, convene, and the bridges. So to facilitate this dialogue, if you like, on different visions on how this development, human development, could take place in a more equitable way, and then have less exclusion, excluding voices, but at the same time, how we could benefit from their knowledge of all these groups into having a more sustainable use in the productive and consumer systems in the country. I would like, and before I finish, because I will open up, I like to have a conversation, if that's okay, or interact with you. But Otto, it would be great, this journey with this Yanama and this intercultural platform has been something we have been pursuing with the University of El Rosario, as well as the Dalai Lama Center at MIT. But it would be great, Otto, at some moment, you could accompany us in Colombia and actually engage into this conversation. It's not an easy conversation. It has many complexities, but certainly I think if we can just move a bit the middle and trying to understand a different way of constructing, building development that works for human and nature, I think that could be a great thing to do. Laura, I'll stop here. I didn't time myself, but I know sometimes I speak too much, so I'll just leave it out here.
Sara, thank you. No, it was wonderful. There were all kinds of questions coming in. Otto, I don't know if you want to respond first, but Sarah, I'm going to see if Otto just wants to come in. And Sarah, I want to just put to you one question. We are going to break into groups, but it's come up us a couple of times in the chat, and it's something that we've spoken about as well too. How do we amplify the voice of Indigenous wisdom? How do we do that in a way that also puts more of a leadership, not only agency, not only listening into, but really the leadership for the future, from different sources of knowing, different traditions, not only because of their ancient traditions, but because of its relevance for the future? How do we do that? That's a hard question for all of us, colleagues, but it resonated in different ways in the chat, Sarah. So I just wanted to share that with you from the group. But Otto, would you like to come in first? Then we go back to Sarah, and then I know we'll take time colleagues in smaller groups as well too after this. Otto?
Well, I mean, just a very quick reaction, Sarah. So thanks for your remarks. That were evocative and eye-opening in many ways. Also because you happen to be in a part of the world where, together with Chile and some other countries, something really interesting is happening. I think interesting, really on a planetary scale. And it's exactly these situations that you described to us, kind of, that I think are at the front line of something we'll see in many other places in the years to come. So so you said the role is to, and yes, for all these regions, I would be offline, very happy to discuss with you, so how I can be helpful in any ways, or my colleagues from the Presencing Institute can be helpful in ways that you suggested. So my question is, I think many of us also, so we have almost like a dual challenge. So there is, on the one hand, we see these we live in a moment where one civilization is dying, right? And another one is being born. And the one that's dying is based on extraction. It's based on ecosystem awareness. And the one that's being born is what you described. It's kind of more based on regeneration, on ecosystem awareness, by which I mean an awareness that is really focusing on the well-being of all. And so in the UNDP, I think you have like two roles, right? You link to the old system that's dying, right? So that's kind of, and how can you be helpful there to, because there are many people inside that old system who actually want to move beyond the current ways of operating, as you know very well. And then you are also connected to the front line that you described, kind of like the YU people that, you know, were really completely excluded, right? Not only kind of from the economic, but also the political and cultural processes, and just on the receiving end of violence and exclusion. So how do you, I think how there is something new happening there, and there's also, I think, a need for a new architecture where these two groups can have some common ground, where they can connect with each other in new ways. How do you see, what have you learned, and or maybe also what are just challenges you face? Because you and the UNDP, kind of the only UN organization that is focusing really on development, is in a very special place there. And I just wonder kind of what your first person experience of that is, and the demands you have, and how you support yourself to show up in these very challenging situations day by day.
Well, Otto, thank you for your question, which is definitely not an easy one to answer, but just a few thoughts on this journey. First, you know, of course, we operate in a society and a context, and my office is the reflection of that society and that context. Even my colleagues in my office at UNDP, but also the wider UN system, do not fully understand their country, their territories, these other visions that have been excluded. So there is a lot of work that is going internally as well to sensitize our own UN colleagues on having actually a different appreciation or sensibility, if you like, awareness on what is the potential of the country and its peoples and its different visions, because they have been actually educated in a very narrow system, and because the country has been at war for so many years, they have grown up in violence, and so they have not been able to get to know their own country, their own people, because of that violence, right? So that is a power exercise. It's not an easy one, because this confronts as well with the day-to-day and the interaction with the formal institutions that we are accompanying, being it the Ministry of Interior, being it the Ministry of Justice, being the Ministry of Planning. So that it's all in parallel. But for instance, what we realized also internally, that we didn't have enough diversity in our own views in terms of crafting these different things, and diversity of looks from the territory and from the central, the cities, the outer, and then from groups of peoples, these being farmers, being Afros, and being ethnic. And part of that is our own systems, which, if you like, are quite elitist. You know, we require certain education, certain certificates, and by that we already exclude a lot of the non-formal knowledge, wisdom, and we exclude it. We did just during the. So that's something that we are working on at internal. On the other side, in terms of the question Laurent was also posing, is the issue of actually the Yanama platform. It's a platform we are trying to build of shared, knowledge and dialogue. And for that, what we are trying to do is also help build the capacities for that interaction. What happens is a little bit what happens to the private sector and the public sector. We often use different language to refer to things. And then there is definitely a lost in translation on what we are trying to say and how we are trying to say it. So the Yanama platform, this intercultural platform in a particular part of the country, is actually a platform that instead of just looking at an energy transition, is actually how we can use that energy transition as an opportunity to transform the territory. So it brings about human development to also those communities, and actually build it with them and not without them, as it has been done all these decades. I would leave it at this at the moment.
Sara, thank you so much so much to discuss and explore, and the comments and the questions and so on keep coming in. So what we'd like to try and do here is break into some smaller groups. For Otto and myself, when we lead a lot of this work in the UN system, we either at this point would move to a journaling exercise, an opportunity for reflection. In a lot of our work, which Sara has also been part of, we've brought in a pianist, and we've had a moment to reflect individually with someone playing based on their resonance and their experience in our group. It's incredibly powerful. So I do want to just share this use of different social technologies. I think is so important. It requires a little bit of bravery, not the usual, for UN settings, and probably most of yours as well too. But I really think these have been huge opportunities for us to start to create those shifts and so on. Now, I want to go back to one of the points that was put in the chat earlier. There was a question, is this connected with other work in futures and foresight and so on? And I just want to say yes. I mean, this is a beautiful tapestry and a landscape, and I'm sure that it's the same for many of you as well. In UNDP, we've mapped and taken a look almost as a 3D map. Where are there initiatives that are focusing on these inner shifts? We have tremendous work taking place in a conscious food alliance, for example, together with the work that we're doing here. Where is this taking place at an organizational level? Sometimes that's not called leadership for systems transformation. Sometimes it's called organizational change, organizational culture. We've been mapping that work as well too. Where are we focused on paradigm shifts? There's a tremendous amount of work, and Sara's talking about some of this in that space as well too. Connects with futures and foresight work, connects with indigenous futures, connects with shifting power dynamics, understanding them, the reality of where we sit in systems now. So we've made an effort to map all of this. And my question for you, our question for you as you're going into the groups is two-part. One, what has resonated for you in what you've heard today from where you are all over the world? And second, where are you sensing into opportunities? Where are there cracks that are emerging? Perhaps it came to you listening into some of these discussions, or that you're working on directly, perhaps for many years. So one, what's resonated today for you? Two, where do you see these cracks or opportunities emerging in your space? We're going to break for, Johanna and Fatima, correct me, but I think we're going to break for 10 minutes.
That's right.
And then, perfect. And then we'd like to come back with a sort of a resonance in the collective as well too. It's always hard in a space like this to be able to interact meaningfully with all of it. We want to try to do that with an exercise at the close. And for those that can stay a little bit late, we'll continue back in smaller groups. So I think 10 minutes. I don't know how we get there. Oh, well, Johan, maybe I should hand over to you at this point for the instructions.
It's no worries. You'll all be automatically moved into the breakout room, so there's no action needed.
Okay, thank you.
Laurel.
Hi, Sara.
Yeah, on the questions, I was not able to see the questions. I know they were very valuable. I would love to have them and also get back to some of the participants. Sorry about that.
No, definitely. I think for all of these sessions, we're building and moving as we go. So we definitely want to stay in touch with these group. And
so we're having a bit of a technical issues here. That's why you're not moving into breakout rooms. We'll try and figure it out in a few seconds.
No problem. I'd suggest as well too, since we don't know when Zoom may change its mind. If you'd like to share your thoughts rather than type them, we'd welcome that as well too. And if you put your hand up, I'll try to be an organized and orderly person, or you just take yourself off mute and then we'll manage that way too. But if anyone would just like to come in and share a reflection, a question, why don't we take a couple of those and hear from everybody?
Yeah. And let's run this way, Laurel. So we skip the breakout rooms and just stay to this format. Okay?
Sure.
Great.
Can I ask Dominika to come in first, please?
Okay. Hi. Yeah. So I'm basically here with a team of students, and we're just researching the role of resilience in times of climate crisis and collapse. And what we're noticing is that there's this big generational shift and or divide, that there is this topic of climate anxiety and lots of desperation that is really so widespread. And so I think like the question that we are having is how can we actually bridge that, and how can we come together as like generations, and also what's the how to spread hope through that, maybe. Yeah.
Dominika, thanks. And thanks to all the people that you're with. We can't see you all, but it's we can see a little bit, you guys. Thanks. And then we're going to come back to it. I'm going to ask both Paulo next and then Laura. And then once we have 3 questions, we'll provide some responses. And then Sophia, I'll come to you in the next round. So Paulo, over to you, please.
Hi. Thank you very much, Laura and Otto and Sara. The disconnection. I work with climate change, and our everyday drama was to communicate what Otto showed, the disconnection and the path of destruction. And people cannot just understand. So what resonated with me today was what Sara mentioned between the rupture between human and nature. And my quest as a scientist, what's the common origin for all the disconnect? And I will say one word that the Brazilian, I connect with the indigenous peoples in the Amazon. It is spirituality and love. And just to mention one phrase from Albert Einstein, for his daughter, love is the strongest force in the universe, and yet we have no equation for it. Hope we can discuss that later further. Thank you.
Paolo, thank you so much. Let me ask Lotte to come in next, and then I have Sophie, Frida, Patrick, and also Magda next. But Lotte, over to you.
Thanks, Paolo. That actually is a good bridge or segue over to what I wanted to say. I think we have a fantastic opportunity at this moment. COVID changed the way we work and organize ourselves. Suddenly, you know, we're not going into offices, but we're staying at home. And we think it's great because we managed to balance both our private life with doing the dishes and getting the kids, and also having a work life that is just, you know, growing by the day. But we're missing the human connections, the opportunity to support each other. That's an innate quality that we want to bring out in the world. And we're not doing that because we're just doing our work ourselves. So I'm thinking that each and every one of us, and each and all of the workplaces, this is an opportunity for connection, because we will see that people, you know, the consequences of working from home will come back to us. So thanks.
Lotte, thanks. I'm going to keep going because now more people have put their hands up and I want everybody to have a chance. So Sophie, could I invite you next? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute. There.
I took out my "and" but forgot to. I was going to say just what Lotte says is setting the table to what I was going to say. What resonates for me today and has resonated in other activities, whether it's via the U Labs or is that I'm not alone, and there is a community. And every time I get into I think it's Laurel who talked about the bravery that's required to do things differently, and in the fear of the upper circle for me is decreased a lot when I can meet with like-minded people who are trying the same thing and failing and scratching their knees and getting up again. And the more these communities are available, whether it's on the screen or in person, the safer I feel to be brave and change the way I'm doing. So for me today, it's a lot of gratitude to be able to find these places.
Sophie, thanks. And I think you're giving some insights back to Dominica's first question as well, too. How do we do this? Frida, please.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's a really nice bridge and connects to what I wanted to say, which is that I think what resonates for me really is the system's way of thinking and moving away from like a reductionist worldview where we work in silos. But that's also very much, I think, the challenge that I face in my daily work, where we are so used to working in silos. And I feel that it's really a mind shift that is needed, and which is not easy, which is not an easy process, and which is not easy also to talk to people about. So I think it would be interesting to hear how you others out there are talking about these issues with people who may not be so into this way of thinking and are more results oriented or focused on that way of thinking, because I find that a huge challenge for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I was smiling when you were talking. I mean, not only do I think we live in the reality of these silos, but I think, or I would personally say more often than not, I hadn't realized the extent to which I was extremely comfortable in them. Even when I was articulating the problems with them, I just fit in it so well. So much made sense in there, right? And it's not it's not where we want to be. It's not how we need to move forward. But thanks for putting the spotlight on that, because it's so much, as Otto was saying, and Sara in different ways, it requires more of ourselves, our compassion, our curiosity, our courage. So thanks. I know we'll get into that later. So Patrick, you're next, and hello, dear Patrick. So, but colleagues, yeah, just because I want you to know that I see all of you. So after Patrick, Magda, Saifo, Heather, Shaman, Tabitha, and Anton is the list that I have. Patrick.
Hello, Laurel. Great to see you. And great to see you, Otto and Sara. I knew you from Jordan. So my question or my query is, how do we shift systems toward the IDGs, toward the SDGs? You know, in the IDGs, our fifth goal is action. And you know, Otto, you talk about collective action, and in some ways we get that collective action almost by magic, by the shifting consciousness, is sort of you know, a critical mass of that. But the work that I'm doing with individual UN agencies and the mapping that Laurel and her colleagues are doing, are mapping these positive steps that we're taking, sort of slogging through organizations, breaking down silos, and work others are doing in their communities. You know, there's a big divide, a big gap between that individual system by system, community by community effort that we're taking, and a collective shift that. And so I'm wondering, you know, how is there something, Otto, you might recommend for that fifth IDG of action that would help us move toward that collective shift in a way that's something we could tangibly work on or intangibly work on with our friends from the Yanama and other native peoples? So that's my long question. Great, thanks.
Patrick, thanks. Once we go through that list that I had so far, all hard questions, I'm giving them to Otto. And then everything else that seems like we can, then I'll come in and I'll ask Sara to come in. Sara, no pressure for you for today. But Patrick, thanks. Magda.
Hello, everybody. So basically everything you have said has resonated with me. I'm Colombian too. I grew up in Colombia. So, and what resonated especially, it was the dichotomy we live in and how we overcome that gap between thinking and action. Because we know the theory, then the methods. For me, it's a matter of self-transformation, mind and heart training. I study mindfulness and teaching mindfulness and yoga for many years and practicing myself. And I can say for myself that it really works. You have to transform the way you see the world. And that's why it attracted me a lot to these IDGs, because I thought it was very similar to the thing I'm working at. And coming back to these core values, compassion, empathy, love, no? And how we see the world and how we relate to that world. So I think mindfulness practices in general, mind training in general is something that could break that gap. Because when you change your heart and the way you see the world and your intention and motivation inside, then that will, I don't know, you can relate better to the world and it will flourish into the world because your attitude make your actions different too. And that change will have an effect in society as well. You will inspire other people. So I think mind and heart training is one of the solutions to break that gap. So, yeah.
Magda, thanks. Yeah, I think that's very powerful. One of the things that we found at UNDP, or at least in exploring this work, so I mean, is that when you have that awareness, how do we activate the courage to move forward with it, right? And something that we don't know what the outcome might be, we have a good sense of why we want to pursue something, go after it, and hold that collective on particular issues. So one thing with Sara, with Otto, with 30 of our other leaders in UNDP, we've developed a guide, a sort of a tool and a guidebook to dialogues. Why? Because it's one thing to say generative dialogue, and that might make sense in a group like this, but for others, it's less accessible, some of these ideas. And we want to take the spirit of the Human Development Report and move forward with conversations exactly like Sara is holding in Colombia that are difficult. They're difficult and they're uncertain and you don't know where they'll go. And that's the opportunity. You hold the space for them. So it's just to say, we've also been trying to build the curiosity, build our compassion, and then direct it in ways that we can support movements concretely. And I think this is where you start to see the energy build and movements form and so on. So important for a group like this as well too. Okay, that was not my role. Saiful, you're next. And apologies if I'm not saying the name properly. Okay. You correct me if I am. Yeah.
No, it's correct. So hi, I'm Jeffrey. So actually, you can call me Jeffrey. So I'm from Taiwan. Well, I'm working on like in education and environmental education. And I found out that this amazing framework fits with my models of dissertations and so on. But my question is how we should translate these IDGs into education, because I believe that education is the first place we can build the human beings, like capabilities, skills, and qualities. So that's the first question. And second question is how to develop assessment for that inclusive, involve all IDGs qualities, so that when we can see individual, like in classroom, for example, students, like, because those are the target key person that in the future they will be the IDGs stakeholder or IDGs people. So my concern is how to develop assessment for the students that is involve those IDGs framework. So I invite all the people here, if you are interested to translate IDGs into education, then we can have a meeting and have a discussions on that. I'm pleased to have that. Okay, that's all for me.
Definitely, thank you. Otto and Sarah, I'm going to have you come back in after Heather because I don't want to lose track. Heather, please.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed everything that's been said tonight, but I particularly was inspired by the story that Sara told. I'm involved in a project in Australia here with Indigenous community, and one thing that as I was listening, I was remembering something that I really learned in a different way from the elder I'm working with about this knowing, doing gap and the things that are barriers between understanding one another. And she said it's to do with listening. And she said that non-Indigenous people listen with their ears on their head, and we listen with on our munta, she called it, which is in the solar plexus. And we kind of, after dialoguing for some time, understood that this was like, she said, our heart is in that place. And there's a kind of intuition there that we started to understand. And anyway, just listening to Sara, I just felt I would share that story.
Heather, thank you. Let me actually invite Sara to come in on this. And Sara, any reflections from what you've heard from everyone in the room? And then Otto, I'll come over to you, and colleagues with your hands up, we will come back.
Yeah, thank you, Laurel. Fascinating reflections, and thank you for making me part of this discussion. But perhaps starting with Heather, yes, the listening with the heart. Even if you don't understand rationally, can you allow yourself to comprehend what, or at least put that, mindset, a bit, open your mind and eventually your heart to the situation of that person, I think is key. And it's not easy to do because you come with your fixed recipes. So how you break those, and I think Saiful actually did say something, education, to actually value that spirituality that Paula was mentioning, cultivating those skills and listening, I think is from early ages, otherwise it's far too late. I think is critical. So I think that work, if it could advance into the curriculums, because at the moment, many of the curriculums are not geared to actually allow the human to express these other different spheres, just the more rational, the mind. And also, I just wanted to connect briefly to what Patrick was saying in terms of that collective shift. And one of the things that we intend to do with this platform, let's say, is render more visible the invisible. So our role is actually to render visible those other ways of doing that could potentially be a source of good to actually connecting the others. But you have to, to elevate that conversation through this platform. So I think that rendering visible the invisible is actually something very powerful. And then just to a final thing, that courage that Frida was mentioning, that mind shift. I think this is something that we have to cultivate, each one of us, in terms of humans. And I think, going through this journey with Laurel and Otto as part of this, UN group that has been allowed to actually think and reflect, it has been extremely powerful, actually, to start seeing things that otherwise I wouldn't be seeing. So I just, I will hold the thought of Paulo, love is the strongest force we have, and I'll keep going.
Thank you, Sara. Otto, please, and then we'll move after Otto. We'll come back. Charmin, you're next. Otto.
Well, that's a really wonderful summary, Sara, that you just gave. I mean, just to add a few points to that, I think, Frida, you were asking the questions so how to talk to others who think differently, right? That's a challenge. And that's where I think what Heather said in the way is the key leverage point, which is deepening our levels of listening, right? Moving the ears from the head to the heart, essentially, which is kind of generative listening. And when I look at my own experience, what I'm shocked about, because you would think, oh, these are deep, fundamental human capacities, and you either have it or not. And if you don't, it takes forever, right? A very long time to develop then. Not true. In my experience, not true. I'm shocked that with a disciplined process, within weeks, you can profoundly change your level of listening. If you change your level of listening, that sounds like a small thing, right? But what basically happens is your experience is changing. Your experience of relationship, your experience of the world. If your experience is changing, pretty much everything is changing. So there is, for example, I mean, I see it right now as we speak in my ULab class here at MIT, the residential class. But we run this ULab also as a free online course online. And the same process is happening there. So it's really just getting together, beginning to use the methods and tools, not doing it alone, but having some people you do this journey with together. And I think, Patrick, on your question, so the number 5, right? IDGs for action. Well, I think the answer to that is how to get traction on the action part of it, right? And I would say the answer is move number 5 to number 1. There's something wrong with the order. And you need to actually start with not your theory, right? Because that's the old pedagogical model, right? First theory and then concepts, and now you train, now you finally apply it. No, you need to do it the other way around. You need to start where the action is now. And that is, the disruption that's happening around us, between us, and within us. That's what you want. So you want to bring people together around that, and then use that. So what do you want to make happen together as the focus point, and the IDGs is basically the how, right? It's the process that you go through to make that happen. And I think it's really an inversion of that whole process that is necessary if you want to address the collective level, right? Because from a systems view, it is actually, there's not much evidence that just if you do individual mindfulness, that with enough people, that somehow that will shift the system. So now I'm still in Wall Street doing the same extractive financial practices, but with mindfulness, I do it a little more effective. That's not the solution. The solution is really apply the power of mindfulness, which is essentially aligning attention and intention, right? Aligning kind of our attention with where our intention is on the level of the collective. That's the leverage point. And I think that's what we can do together. And that doesn't matter. So how does that shift eventually happen? I think at first it happens in very small groups. It's between what we do. It's between me and you. It's kind of the small groups. It's the small circles. Those will be the seeding places of a new civilization. And it doesn't, big change, transformative change doesn't start out big. It starts out in very small groups. And that's why every one of us in this call is in the very front line of that movement and kind of so we have the possibility to shift our relationships in our own context. And that's the starting point for that whole process. So the last thing, education.
Otto, sorry, we're running out a bit of time. And
okay.
I think you had a very good concluding remark that was very inspiring, the last thing. But if you just want to say one sentence about education.
Yeah,
please.
That's what I wanted to say.
Great.
So, which is, here's not how to do it, adding a new class to the old curriculum, right? That's not. But what you need to do is to shift the purpose of education from the old primary focus, which is the transmission of knowledge, the transfer of knowledge, to a new one, which is building the capacity to sense and shape and co-shape the future.
Great. Thank you, Otto. So we're about to conclude. I just want to say to everyone, you're invited to hang out another 10 minutes past if you do have time for that. Just want to say thank you very much to Laurel, Otto, and Sara so far, and you'll stay with us for another 10 minutes or so, or maybe 8 minutes. And we do have some information also for coming gatherings. So we'll just take a minute or two for that, Fatima.
Yes, Otto was talking about listening, and the next gathering is the title is New Thinking for New Possibilities, and it's actually a method for asking the right questions also. So it's with Mary Lee Adams, the 26th of October, and we're posting the links now. I will just mention briefly that we are calling out for, we're very Western biased right now. So we're calling out for researchers in other parts of the world who can also, if there's been research on these indigenous methods that was mentioned before, we are really looking for more input on the IDGs and the methods. We're just launching the Global Leadership for Sustainable Development, and we need more applicants from some countries, and we're posting that link too. It's for non-Western countries that we want to go deeper in. And on the 28th September, there's an Emerge gathering where you can listen to Claudia, our colleague, commenting on how to apply the IDGs on the Ukraine war. And also there's a link to the hubs. If you're in a country or a city who doesn't have a hub and you want to start up gathering people who are interested in this and go acting together and starting a hub, there will be a link also to this. And Pontus, who is leading the hubs, he will stay and have a special breakout room if someone wants to talk more about the hubs in the Afterglow. And we're not going to finish the Afterglow. I know you need to leave, but we can stay for more than 10 minutes and talk. So let's get back into the Afterglow.
Yes. So if you want to join a breakout room or so with Pontus about the hubs, please just put that in the chat, and you'll be able to join actually the breakout rooms, right, Ola? Because you can move freely. So there'll be a button at the bottom of your screen soon where it says breakout rooms, and you can join one with Pontus there. But I just want to hand it back to Laurel, Otto, and Sara if you want to comment further. I just want to say there's an amazing engagement in this meeting with all the hands raised and all the nice questions and reflections shared. But I'll just hand it back to you, Laurel, Otto, and Sara for further comments or thoughts.
Johan, thanks. And so for Sharon, for Tabitha, for Anton, for Louise and Michaela, I'm sorry that we didn't, and Orem as well too, we didn't have the chance to get to your questions, but as Sara was saying, if you put them in the chat or reach out differently, we would love to hear from you. I want to pick up from what Otto said just as a concluding thought from my side that I think is really important. It's not only this sort of false sense of first I have an idea and then I learn something and then I apply it and then so it becomes. I think it's really important, this point that Otto is making, and to me, not only from the reality that that's not how things change, and we know that things change because we take a risk. Things change because we feel fed up. Things change because someone inspires us, someone loves us, someone has confidence in us. It leads us to do something we wouldn't have otherwise done. There's no rational process through a lot of this, at least not when it's transformative. And it brings in our whole self. It's not confined to your work stream versus your home stream. It's you. And I think that's incredibly important. The connection I want to make to that is because the nature of uncertainty and the global challenges that we're seeing is not going to slow down. Nothing will go back. We won't be where we were before. There's no precedent for a lot of what we're facing. So this notion of waiting for something to be received and somehow digested and moved and so on will slow us down. It won't move us towards, it won't build that bridge that we're looking for. What will build that bridge? You with the capabilities specific to you in the context in which you're operating. Those are unique to you, right? But it will be those qualities that you build the sort of the action confidence, we would call it, to activate. This is where we'll start to see. And then to me, the power, colleagues, for all of us here is holding the space to be together. Not to muck around in it all the time. Sometimes we got to muck around in it, but a lot of the time is to hold the space with the confidence to see what will emerge, and you won't know until you do it. That's at least the experience, that we've had. And I'd really just encourage us, let us force ourselves out of some of these binaries or pathways or journeys. Imagine it more as a symphony. Lots of things happening at once. We're holding the space for that, and for others, right, for their agency and for their leadership as well too. Sara, let me ask if there's anything you want to add, and then I know there's groups and so on, colleagues, that we can break into.
No, just to say thank you everyone actually for being here, and all the thing that is coming through the chat. Great ideas, great thought that I will take further. So just to say thank you from my side, has been really enriching to hearing from all of you.
Johan, Fatima, what do you say? We hand back to you both.
Yeah, it's a beautiful gathering. Everybody are participating and we learn from each other. We discuss, we massage the IDGs. So it's really beautiful to be part of this. I've learned a lot too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I take with me the reordering of the IDGs from you, Otto, starting with action. I think that's a good way to start learning by doing. So that's great. So thank you. Thank you very much for sharing your insights and your experiences, both to Laurel, Sara, and Otto, and to everybody else who's joined in and been very active in the chat. It's been commenting all the time. I just want to tip, if you don't know, you can save the chat to your own computer so you can look back at it later. If you go into the chat window at the bottom there are 3 dots down to the right there where you can go save the chat. It's at the top of the menu there. So if you want to look back, there are links and very interesting ways to get connected going forward. So thank you very much. And we will stay, Fatima and I will stay for another 10 minutes or so. But I know Otto and Sara and Laurel, you have to move on. So thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your experiences. So why don't we just turn on our microphones and we say goodbye in our own languages to Laurel, Sara, and Otto. Just turn on your microphones and say goodbye in your own language.
Adios.
A presto.
Tot ziens.